There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They were the quiet close of a Tuesday night, or the unassuming silence of a room after midnight, and you don't realize until much later that they were not moments at all, but doorways. They were hinges on which the entire architecture of your world would swing. For me, that moment was the specific, unassuming weight of Julian's hand resting over my heart. He was asleep, lost to the world in that profound way only he could be, a total and unconditional surrender to unconsciousness. I was not. I was achingly, intensely awake, cataloging the geography of his palm against the thin cotton of my t-shirt, the gentle pressure of his fingers rising and falling with my every breath, a breath I was consciously trying to keep steady, to keep even, so as not to disturb the fragile peace of this accidental intimacy. The only light in my bedroom came from the hazy orange glow of a streetlight filtering through the blinds, casting long, skeletal shadows across the walls. It was a painterly light, the kind I usually sought with my camera, but now it served only to illuminate the paradox I was living in. He was closer to me than anyone had ever been, and yet he was 1,000 miles away, dreaming of things I would never know. His proximity a testament not to a shared reality, but to his own oblivious need for comfort. And I, the quiet observer, the lifelong archivist of my own loneliness, was left to wonder if this weight on my chest was an anchor or a lifeline. Our story didn't begin in the tender darkness of my bedroom, but in the sterile, chlorinated brightness of a community pool a decade and a half earlier. It began with the sharp, clean scent of chlorine and the deafening echo of a starter pistol. Julian Vance was, for the first 10 years I knew him, not a person so much as a force of nature, a shimmering, golden ideal I was perpetually chasing. We were swimmers, both sprinters, locked in an orbit of lanes 3 and 4, meet after meet, season after season. He was all fluid power and radiant confidence, the kind of boy who seemed to be lit from within, whose laughter was easy and frequent, who collected friends and accolades with the same casual grace. I was not. I was quiet, observant, and my successes in the water were born not of natural talent, but of a grim, methodical dedication. I studied the physics of a perfect turn, the precise angle of entry for a dive, the rhythm of breathing that would cost me the fewest hundredths of a second. I was a technician of the sport. He was its artist. He always beat me. It was a fact of our universe, as reliable as the sun rising. He would touch the wall a fraction of a second before I did, and I would surface, gasping, to the sight of his grin, water streaming from his sun-bleached hair as he hoisted himself from the pool in one effortless motion. There was never any malice in his victory, only a kind of joyful, uncomplicated supremacy. He would offer a hand to help me out, his grip firm and warm, and say, "Good race, Leo." And the sincerity in his voice was almost more infuriating than the loss itself. I channeled that frustration into my training, into thousands of lonely laps in the early morning darkness, the black line at the bottom of the pool, my only companion. Julian became the measure of my own worth, a relentless, smiling ghost I was trying to outpace. I didn't hate him. In truth, a secret, shameful part of me admired him with a ferocity that bordered on reverence. I hated that I couldn't be him, and I hated that he made me feel so acutely myself. Our rivalry was the central pillar of my adolescence, a defining relationship built on shared water and unspoken competition. Then, we graduated, and the pillar crumbled. We went to different universities in different states, and the constant, motivating presence of Julian Vance vanished from my life. I swam for 2 more years in college, but the fire had dimmed. Without him in the next lane, the black line at the bottom of the pool seemed to stretch on into a meaningless infinity. I quit the team and poured my obsessive focus into a new pursuit, photography. The camera became a shield and a lens, a way to engage with the world from a safe, controlled distance. I learned to see the beauty in overlooked details, in the interplay of light and shadow, in the quiet, unguarded moments of strangers. I was building a new life, one in which I was the one defining the frame. not the one desperately trying to catch up to someone else's. I thought that was the end of the story of Julian and me. He was a ghost of the past, a symbol of a version of myself I had outgrown. Then, one rainy October afternoon in our junior year of college, I walked into a small, independent coffee shop near my campus to escape a sudden downpour, and there he was. He was sitting at a small table by the window, staring out at the rain, a textbook on software engineering lying open and ignored beside his cup. He looked different, yet exactly the same. The easy confidence was still there in the set of his shoulders, but there was a new thoughtfulness in his expression, a quietness I had never seen on him before. His university was over an hour away. He was in town for a specialized seminar, he explained. He'd broken up with his high school girlfriend, Sarah, a few months prior, and he was still navigating the strange, untethered feeling of being truly on his own for the first time. We talked for 3 hours. The rain stopped, the sun came out, and we just kept talking. We talked about the suffocating pressure of competitive sports and the strange relief of letting it go. We talked about our majors, his logical world of code, and my abstract world of light and composition. I saw, for the first time, the person behind the golden athlete. I saw his anxieties about the future, his frustrations with a particularly difficult programming language, his quiet pride in a project he'd built. He wasn't a rival anymore. He was just a person, and a surprisingly interesting one at that. When we finally parted ways, we exchanged numbers, with a vague promise to hang out sometime. I didn't expect it to happen. It was the kind of thing people said, but it did happen. A few weeks later, he texted me, asking if I wanted to go to a concert for some indie band playing in my town. I went, and after that, it became a regular thing. He'd drive over once or twice a month, and we'd fall into an easy, comfortable friendship that felt both entirely new and decades old. It was a friendship built in the negative space of our old rivalry. We had a shared history, a shorthand that required no explanation, but we were free to build something new on top of that foundation. It was during this time, in the quiet moments of our burgeoning friendship, that my old, complicated admiration began to transmute into something else, something deeper and far more terrifying. It happened slowly, insidiously. It was in the way he'd listen, truly listen, when I talked about my photography, his brow furrowed in genuine concentration. It was in the way his laugh seemed to fill up all the empty spaces in my small apartment. It was in the casual, unconscious way he would sometimes touch my arm to emphasize a point, a brief, electric contact that would leave my skin buzzing long after he'd pulled away. I kept it buried, of course. I buried it so deep it felt like a part of my geology, a vein of precious, dangerous, or running through my core. He was Julian. He was straight. He had a new girlfriend, a cheerful economics major named Chloe, and he seemed happy. I became the friend, the confidant, the stable, reliable presence in his life. I photographed their smiling faces at parties, listened to his minor frustrations about their relationship, and played my part so perfectly that even I sometimes forgot it was a performance. My camera remained my shield, but now it served a different purpose. It allowed me to stare at him, to capture the way the light caught the gold in his hair, the crinkles that formed at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, without anyone ever suspecting the yearning behind the lens. I was the archivist of his life, and my own feelings were the one subject that would forever remain out of focus. This was our equilibrium, a carefully balanced system of unspoken truths and comfortable fictions. And for a long time, it was enough. It had to be. The equilibrium shattered on a Tuesday night in late April, the kind of night that still holds the last chill of winter but carries the scent of impending spring rain on the wind. The catalyst was, as it so often is, a phone call. It was almost midnight when my phone buzzed with his name. I assumed it was a pocket dial or a random text about a meme he'd seen. But when I answered, the voice on the other end was hollowed out, a ghost of his usual confident tone. It was one word. Leo. The way he said my name was enough. It wasn't a question or a greeting. It was a plea. He and Chloe had ended things. It wasn't a dramatic, explosive breakup, but a slow, quiet erosion of a thing that was never built to last. A death by 1,000 miscommunications and divergent futures. He had been the one to end it, a fact that seemed to compound his misery, layering it with a thick, suffocating coat of guilt. He tried to sound fine, to wrap his words in the familiar armor of casualness, but I could hear the fractures in his voice, the tremor he was trying to control. He was at his apartment, alone, and the silence, he said, was too loud. He didn't ask to come over. He never would have. Julian was proud, conditioned to be the one offering support, not seeking it. So I made the offer for him. "My couch is empty," I said, trying to make it sound like the most insignificant offer in the world. "And I have that terrible whiskey you like." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, a silence so heavy I could feel the weight of his indecision. Then, a small, broken sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Yeah," he whispered. "Okay." He arrived 20 minutes later, looking like a ship that had been battered by a storm I hadn't seen. His hair was a mess, his eyes were red-rimmed, and he was wearing a faded university sweatshirt that looked a size too big on his usually imposing frame. He didn't want the whiskey. He just sank into the corner of my worn-out sofa, pulled a throw blanket over his legs, and started talking. He talked for hours, not just about Chloe, but about everything. About the mounting pressure of his final year, the terrifying uncertainty of life after graduation, the feeling that he was just playing a part, the successful, happy guy, and was terrified of what would be left if he ever stopped performing. I just listened, refilling his glass of water, offering nothing but my quiet, uninterrupted presence. It was the first time I had ever seen him so completely stripped of his armor, and the sight was both heartbreaking and profoundly intimate. Around 3 in the morning, his words finally ran out. He leaned his head back against the cushions, his eyes closed, the exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "I should go," he murmured, but made no move to get up. "Don't be an idiot," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "Just sleep here. Take the bed. I'll take the couch." He shook his head, a barely perceptible motion. "No, the couch is fine." Seriously, he didn't open his eyes. "Thanks, Leo. For this." I left him there, pulling another blanket over him before retreating to my bedroom. I closed the door, but I couldn't sleep. I could feel his presence on the other side of the wall, a low hum of sadness that seemed to permeate the entire apartment. This was new territory for us, a fundamental shift in our dynamic. I had always been the one in his orbit, but now, for the first time, he had drifted into mine, seeking a safe harbor. And I was terrified of the hope that realization sparked within me, a treacherous, foolish hope that I knew I had to extinguish before it could burn me alive. That night was the beginning of the shift, the first hairline fracture in the foundation of our carefully constructed platonic friendship. The door had been opened, just a crack, and I had no idea how to close it again. That first night established a new precedent. My apartment became his default sanctuary. It began innocently enough. After a long week of classes or a stressful project, he'd text me, "Movie night?" And I would always say yes. He would show up with pizza or takeout, and we would settle onto the couch, falling into the comfortable rhythm we'd established years ago. But something was different now. The space between us on the couch, once a respectable and clearly defined buffer zone, began to shrink. It was a slow, almost imperceptible erosion of boundaries. At first, it would be an accidental brush of his knee against mine. Then, he would start to lean, just slightly, until his shoulder was resting against mine as the movie played. I would sit there, rigid, my entire consciousness focused on that single point of contact, trying to breathe normally, trying to pretend it meant nothing. I became a student of his movements, a connoisseur of his casual touches. I analyzed them with the same methodical intensity one had once applied to my swimming turns. Was this conscious? Was he aware of what he was doing? Or was I just a convenient, warm object, a substitute for the easy physical affection he was missing from a relationship? The ambiguity was a special kind of torture. Each touch was a spark of hope followed by the cold water of doubt. He gave no sign that he was aware of my internal turmoil. He would laugh at a joke in the movie, his whole body shaking against mine, and seem utterly oblivious to the storm he was creating inside me. It was a ritual of quiet intimacy, steeped in plausible deniability. For him, it was likely just comfort. For me, it was everything. The ritual escalated. One night, about a month into this new arrangement, he fell asleep during a particularly slow film. His head, which had been resting on the back of the couch, slumped sideways until it came to rest on my shoulder. My heart hammered against my ribs so violently I was sure it would wake him. I sat there for over an hour, my arm going numb, not daring to move, just breathing in the scent of his shampoo and feeling the soft tickle of his hair against my neck. It was the most exquisite agony I had ever known. I was a statue, a living pedestal for his unconscious trust, and I felt a wave of protective tenderness so powerful it almost brought tears to my eyes. This was Julian, the golden boy, the force of nature, and he was sleeping on my shoulder, vulnerable and unguarded. It felt like being entrusted with a secret I was not supposed to know. When the movie ended, the sudden silence in the room felt profound. I knew I had to wake him, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The thought of breaking the spell, of him pulling away with a sheepish apology and re-establishing the boundary between us, was unbearable. So I just sat there in the flickering light of the television's end credits, until finally, I gently shook his shoulder. He woke with a start, blinking in confusion. "Oh, man," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Sorry." I crashed. He looked at me, his gaze still clouded with sleep, and for a fleeting second, there was no filter, no performance, just a raw, open vulnerability. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual easy smile. "Your couch is way too comfortable." That became his new excuse. A few nights later, he stayed late again, and as he stretched, he let out a theatrical groan. "Dude, I love your couch, but it's killing my back." "I'm getting old," he said it as a joke, but he was watching me, a question in his eyes that he didn't dare speak aloud. The air in the room thickened, charged with unspoken possibility. This was a crossroads, a moment where I could either reinforce the boundary or let it dissolve completely. I could have laughed it off, told him to go home to his own bed. It would have been the smart thing to do, the self-preservational thing. But looking at his tired face, the subtle plea in his eyes, I found I was incapable of being smart. "You can take the bed," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "It's no big deal," he hesitated, just for a moment. "Are you sure?" "I don't want to kick you out. It's a queen," I said, the words sounding absurdly clinical. "There's plenty of room. If you stay on your side." I added the last part as a clumsy attempt at a joke, a way to defuse the tension, to give us both an out. He smiled, a small, grateful smile that made my stomach flip. "Deal." And so, the ritual moved from the living room to the bedroom. The first night was a study in tense choreography. We were like two opposing magnets, hyper-aware of the space between us, each of us clinging to our respective edges of the mattress. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of his breathing, every rustle of the sheets a momentous event. I was acutely aware of his body heat radiating across the small gulf that separated us. Sleep felt like an impossible summit to be scaled. But eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted into a light, restless slumber. I woke in the middle of the night to a strange warmth and a heavy weight across my waist. I opened my eyes. In his sleep, Julian had rolled over, throwing an arm and a leg over me, pulling my back against his chest. He was pressed against me, from my shoulders to my knees, his face buried in the space between my shoulder blades, his breath a warm, steady puff against my neck. Panic, sharp and electric, shot through me, followed by a wave of something so dangerously close to joy that it terrified me. I lay there, trapped and liberated, not daring to move a muscle. This was the gray area, the land of plausible deniability. He was asleep. It meant nothing. He was just seeking warmth, a human anchor in the dark. It was a story I told myself over and over, a mantra to ward off the catastrophic hope that was blooming in my chest. This became our new normal. He would stay over 2 or 3 nights a week, always starting on the couch, always ending up in my bed with the same excuse. And almost every night, I would wake up to find him holding me, as if I were a teddy bear or a lifeline. The bedroom door became a symbol. I would always leave it slightly ajar when he was on the couch, a silent, unspoken invitation. It was an offer he could accept or ignore, preserving the fiction that this was all just a matter of convenience. Some nights, I would lie in bed and watch the sliver of light from the hallway, waiting, my heart a frantic drum in the quiet of the room. I'd hear the couch creak, the soft padding of his footsteps on the hardwood floor, and then his silhouette would appear in the doorway. He would stand there for a moment, a shadow in the dim light, before quietly slipping into the room and sliding into bed beside me. No words were ever exchanged in these moments. It was a ritual conducted in complete silence, a shared understanding that was too fragile to be touched by language. We were building a new reality together, one that existed only in the dark, between the hours of midnight and dawn, a reality that neither of us had the courage to acknowledge in the light of day. It was a beautiful, tender, and utterly unsustainable lie. The breaking point came, as it had to, on a night that was no different from any of the others. It was a Thursday. Rain was streaking down the window panes, blurring the city lights into a watercolor painting. We had foregone the pretense of a movie and had gone straight to my room. The unspoken arrangement now so ingrained it required no setup. We lay in our usual positions, on our respective sides of the bed, the comfortable silence stretching between us. But tonight, the silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It was charged, heavy with the weight of everything we had left unsaid for months. I could feel him watching me in the dark. I wasn't facing him, but I could feel the intensity of his gaze on my back, a tangible pressure. I realized, with a jolt, that his breathing wasn't the slow, deep rhythm of impending sleep. He was as wide awake as I was. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sounds were the rain against the glass and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I was trapped in a state of suspended animation, terrified to move, to breathe, to do anything that might shatter the fragile tension. I wondered if I should turn over, if I should say something, but my body felt paralyzed by a potent cocktail of fear and anticipation. We had been playing a long, delicate game, and I sensed, with absolute certainty, that the final move was about to be made. I just didn't know who would make it. Then, his voice, quiet and rough, cut through the darkness. "Leo." It was barely a whisper, but it sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I willed my own voice to work, to sound casual, normal. "Yeah." Another long, agonizing pause. I could hear him shift slightly, the rustle of the comforter a deafening roar. I finally found the courage to turn over, to face him. In the gloom, I could just make out the shape of him, propped up on one elbow, looking down at me. His expression was unreadable, a landscape of shadows. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his voice still low, laced with an unfamiliar hesitation. "You can ask me anything," I replied, and the truth of that statement hung in the air between us, stark and absolute. He took a slow breath, and I watched the way the faint light caught the line of his jaw. He seemed to be weighing his next words with an incredible gravity, as if they were impossibly heavy. He was searching my face for something, a sign, permission, I didn't know what. The silence stretched again, and this time I let it. This was his moment, his precipice. I had spent years observing, analyzing, waiting. I could wait a few seconds more. Then, finally, he spoke the words that would dismantle our carefully constructed world and build a new one in its place. "Would it be okay," he started, his voice cracking almost imperceptibly on the last word, "if I kissed you?" The question was not a proposition. It was a confession. It was a raw, vulnerable appeal, stripped of all artifice, all plausible deniability. It was the bravest thing I had ever heard. For a moment, my brain couldn't process it. The words seemed to hang in the air, shimmering and unreal. My entire history with him flashed through my mind. The swimming pool, the coffee shop, the nights on the couch, the silent ritual of him coming to my bed. It all led to this single, terrifying, beautiful question. My fear was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but beneath it, a wave of impossible, radiant hope swelled, so powerful it threatened to drown me. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded, a small, jerky movement in the dark. It was all the answer he needed. He leaned down slowly, giving me every possible chance to pull away, to stop him. I didn't. I met him halfway, rising slightly to close the final inches between us. His lips were softer than I could have ever imagined, and the kiss was nothing like the passionate, desperate encounters I had sometimes guiltily fantasized about. It was tentative, questioning, achingly gentle. It was a conversation without words, a seeking of reassurance. One of his hands came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek with a feather-light touch, and the simple, tender gesture broke something open inside me. All the years of yearning, of carefully guarded feelings, of silent observation, collapsed in that single moment. There was no before, no after, only this one, perfect, fragile now. When he finally pulled back, the space between our faces felt electric. He rested his forehead against mine, and I could feel his breath, warm and unsteady, against my lips. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The question had been asked, and the answer had been given, and in the quiet, rain-soaked darkness of my room, everything had changed. The morning after was a landscape of blinding sunlight and awkward silence. The change, which had felt so profound and irreversible in the cocoon of darkness, now seemed fragile and uncertain in the harsh light of day. I woke up first, to find Julian still asleep, his arm thrown over my chest, his face peaceful. For a few blissful moments, I was able to simply exist in the new reality, to savor the solid, comforting weight of him against me. But as the minutes ticked by, anxiety began to seep in, a cold, creeping fog. What did this mean? What were we now? The questions looped endlessly in my mind, a frantic, silent chorus. When he finally stirred, the shift was immediate and palpable. He woke with a jolt, as if suddenly remembering where he was and who he was with. He pulled his arm back as if he'd been burned, and the space he created between us felt like a chasm. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He mumbled something about needing to get to an early study session, his voice tight and unfamiliar. He moved with a frantic, clumsy energy, pulling on his clothes from the day before, avoiding my gaze as if it were a physical blow. The easy intimacy of the past few months had evaporated, replaced by a tension so thick I could barely breathe. "Hey," I said softly, as he stood by the door, his hand on the knob. He finally looked at me, but his eyes were guarded, his expression shuddered. "I gotta go," he said, the words clipped. "I'll, text you later." He didn't text me later. The silence that followed was a physical presence in my apartment. It was heavier than any of the unspoken words that had come before. For 3 days, I heard nothing. My phone, which had once been a constant source of connection to him, became an instrument of torture, a silent testament to his absence. I replayed the kiss over and over in my mind, searching for a flaw, a misinterpretation, something I had done wrong. Had I imagined the tenderness? Had I misread the vulnerability in his question? Maybe it had been a mistake, a moment of grief-fueled confusion on his part that he now deeply regretted. The thought was a cold, sharp blade twisting in my gut. The beautiful, fragile thing we had built in the dark had been exposed to the light and had crumbled to dust. My carefully constructed world of quiet observation had been shattered. I was no longer a passive archivist. I was an active participant in a story I no longer understood. The ambiguity that I had once found so agonizing now seemed like a lost paradise compared to this new, brutal certainty of his rejection. The hope he had ignited in me had become a raging fire of anxiety and self-doubt. I felt like a fool. I had let him in, not just into my apartment and my bed, but into the deepest, most fortified parts of myself, and he had simply walked away, leaving the door wide open behind him. On the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. The passivity that had defined my life for so long was no longer an option. I had to know. I needed to hear it from him, even if it was the worst possible news. I drove to his apartment, my hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel, my stomach a roiling sea of dread. I had no plan, no speech prepared. I was operating on pure, desperate instinct. I found him just outside his building, tossing a duffel bag into the back of his car. He was heading to a weekend swim meet, a reunion event for alumni of his old team. He froze when he saw me, a deer caught in headlights. The guarded, shuttered look was back in his eyes, but this time it was mixed with something else, guilt. "Julian," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk." He slammed his trunk shut, the sound echoing in the quiet parking lot. "Leo, I can't right now. I'm late." He tried to brush past me, but I stepped into his path, blocking him. "No," I said. "Now? Just tell me what's going on. Tell me it was a mistake. Tell me you regret it. Just say something. Anything is better than this silence." He finally looked at me, and I saw the conflict warring in his eyes. He looked exhausted, lost. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "It wasn't a mistake," he said, his voice low and strained. "That's the problem." He leaned against his car, suddenly looking defeated. "I don't know what I'm doing, Leo. I'm not." He trailed off, unable to find the words. "My whole life, there's been a path, a plan. Swim, get good grades, get a degree, get a job, meet a girl. It's all laid out. And you're not on the path." The words hit me harder than a physical blow. I wasn't on the path. I was a detour, a complication, a crack in the perfect pavement of his well-planned life. "So what am I?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "A phase? An experiment? A comfortable place to sleep when you're lonely?" "No," he said, his voice rising with a desperate intensity. "You're not. You're my best friend. You're the only person I can actually be myself with. And I'm terrified of messing that up. I'm terrified of what this means." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. "When I'm with you, everything feels quiet. It feels right. But then the sun comes up, and the rest of the world comes rushing back in, and I don't know how to make those two things fit together. I don't know how to be that person from your bedroom out here." His confession was a torrent of fear and confusion, a raw, unfiltered look into the chaos of his own mind. He was just as lost as I was, maybe more so. He wasn't pulling away because he didn't feel anything. He was pulling away because he felt too much, and he didn't have a map for this new, uncharted territory. The anger and hurt that had been coiling inside me for days began to slowly unwind, replaced by a deep, aching empathy. He wasn't a coward. He was just scared. I took a step closer to him, closing the distance he had tried so hard to create. "So you were just going to leave?" I asked softly. "You were just going to let me think that it meant nothing?" A single tear escaped the corner of his eye and traced a path down his cheek. He didn't bother to wipe it away. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words choked with a shame that was painful to witness. "Leo, I'm so sorry. I'm just so scared of losing you." "You're losing me right now, Julian," I said, the words catching in my throat. This silence. This is how you lose me." The truth of that statement hung between us, stark and undeniable. He looked at my face, really looked at me for the first time in days, and I saw the walls he had built around himself begin to crumble. The fear was still there, but beneath it, something else was starting to break through. A flicker of resolve. A glimmer of the courage I had heard in his voice in the darkness of my room. He was at a precipice, and he had to choose whether to retreat or to jump. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that he might just be brave enough to jump. The conversation that followed wasn't easy. It was halting and awkward, and filled with long pauses as we both struggled to find a language for the new world we found ourselves in. We sat on the curb in that empty parking lot, the Saturday morning sun climbing higher in the sky, and we talked. We really talked, for the first time, without the cover of darkness or the safety of plausible deniability. Julian spoke of the suffocating weight of expectations, both his own and those he felt from his family, his friends, the world. He spoke of his identity as something he'd always considered fixed and immutable, and how his feelings for me had shaken that foundation to its core. He admitted that his instinct, when faced with something he couldn't understand or control, was to run. It was the sprinter's instinct. When the gun goes off, you go, you don't look back. I, in turn, finally let him see the other side of our story. I told him about the years of quiet admiration, of the carefully concealed yearning. I told him how each casual touch, each night he spent on my couch, in my bed, had been both a gift and a form of exquisite torture. I explained how his silence after the kiss hadn't felt like confusion. It had felt like a judgment, a confirmation of my deepest fear that I had been nothing more than a temporary comfort, easily discarded. As I spoke, I saw his expression shift from one of defensive fear to one of dawning, painful understanding. He was finally seeing the consequences of his fear, the hurt it had caused. He was seeing me, not as a complication to his life plan, but as a person with his own history, his own vulnerabilities. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, his voice thick with regret. "That's the last thing I ever wanted to do." "I know," I said. And I did. I knew his fear wasn't born of malice, but of a profound confusion that I couldn't begin to fathom. "But Julian, you can't protect our friendship by pretending this isn't happening. That's not protection, it's erasure. You're erasing me. You're erasing this." He reached out then, his hand hesitating for a moment in the air between us before he rested it on my knee. His touch was no longer accidental or ambiguous. It was deliberate, an apology, a promise. "I don't want to erase it," he said quietly, his eyes locked on mine. "I don't know what it is yet, but I don't want to lose it. I don't want to lose you." He took a deep breath, a man steeling himself for a dive into deep, unknown waters. Can we just figure it out? Slowly? Together?" It was another question, just like the one he had asked in the dark. But this one was different. It wasn't about a single moment of physical intimacy. It was about a future. It was a plea for patience, for grace, for a chance to be brave. And as I looked at him, at the genuine, terrified hope in his eyes, I knew my answer. "Okay," I said, my voice soft. Slowly. Together, a wave of relief washed over his face, so profound it was like watching the sun break through a storm cloud. He didn't go to the swim meet. He called the organizer, made an excuse, and his duffel bag remained in the trunk of his car. Instead, he came back with me to my apartment. The space felt different now. The ghosts of anxiety and misunderstanding had been exorcised by the harsh light of our honest conversation. There was a new quiet in the room, but it wasn't the quiet of tension or unspoken feelings. It was a quiet of peace, of acceptance. That night, when we went to bed, there was no choreography of distance. There was no pretense. He turned to me, and I turned to him, and he pulled me into his arms. He held me with a new kind of intention, a possessiveness that was both gentle and firm. It wasn't the unconscious clutch of a sleeper seeking comfort. It was the conscious embrace of a man holding onto something precious. He kissed me again, and this time, there was no hesitation, no question. It was a kiss of confirmation, of homecoming. We didn't talk much more that night. We didn't need to. We had found our language in the quiet honesty of touch, in the shared rhythm of our breathing in the dark. The door to my bedroom was closed. It wasn't an invitation anymore. It was a statement. It defined the room as our space, a sanctuary we were building together, board by board, truth by truth. The days and weeks that followed were a process of learning this new geography. We learned how to hold hands in public, a small, revolutionary act that felt both terrifying and triumphant. We learned how to navigate the questions from our friends, how to introduce a new definition for our relationship without needing to provide a full history of its clandestine beginnings. Julian learned to quiet the voice of the outside world and listen to the one inside him. And I learned to trust, to believe that the warmth beside me in the morning would still be there, that his presence was not a temporary reprieve, but a permanent fixture in my life. There are rooms in your life you only recognize as sanctuaries long after you've left them. Their memory is soft, glowing space you can return to in your mind. But sometimes, if you are very, very lucky, you get to build a new one. You find a person who sees the architecture of your soul, who isn't afraid of your dark corners or your empty spaces. They don't just visit, they move in. They hang pictures on the walls. They close the door against the cold, and in the beautiful, honest silence you learn to create together, you both finally find a place to be truly, completely home. Julian was no longer a rival to be chased or a secret to be kept. He was the quiet in the room, the weight on my chest, the steady hand in mine. He was my anchor, and he was my lifeline. He was home,